Hello students, I am Sonali Kelkar from City International School, and today we are going to do the third part of the topic, how do organisms reproduce. So the points which are going to covered in this topic are reproduction in plants, sexual reproduction in flowering plants, parts of male and female, that is reproductive organs in flowers, then fertilization and especially the double fertilization, seed formation, and then the future of ovules and ovary. So let's start today's session. Let's have a recap over here. Natural vegetative propagation we did in our last session, students, and there are different ways of natural vegetative propagation, that is by roots, right? So what is vegetative propagation? We have already discussed that any part of the plant can be cut and sown, and from that part we can get a new plant, right? So what all parts of the plant that can be cut and sown? Let's see. By roots, we can cut the roots of few plants and grow it. You will get a new plant, right? Then by stems. In the stems, we saw how the runners can be used. Then underground stems such as a potato, that is nothing but tuber, gingers which are called rhizomes, and onions which we call bulbs. These are the different names of different types of stems, children. Okay, then by leaves we did bryophyllum is the leaf. Okay, from these leaf and the notches of the leaf, you can see the roots, adventitious roots, and from there you can see the small buds. You can separate these buds, grow them separately, right? So these are the different ways of naturally vegetative propagation. Now there are artificial vegetative propagation also, such as grafting, cutting, layering, and tissue culture. We have already discussed. Let's see what we are going to do today. So now comes the sexual reproduction. We all are aware that a sexual reproduction we need two parents, right? So a newborn baby is developed from the fusion of the gametes. Okay, now the male gamete is the sperm and the female gamete is called ovum. When the sperm and ovum fuses together, they form zygote, right? And from there, this zygote will develop, undergoes different type of cellular division, and it develops into a new baby, right? So this is important. Was few important points are the two parents, that is male and female, that is two sexes are important for sexual reproduction, right? Then we can see the variation occur in sexual reproduction. You see the newborn baby is not exactly to its parents, right? And what is the other thing which is important in sexual reproduction? This reproduction is relatively slower mode of reproduction, right? So this is a little limitation of sexual reproduction. Let's see the significance of sexual reproduction. Okay, now each individual in a species has its own uniqueness and identity. So no one is similar to each other. Everyone is unique. Everyone has its own identity, right? And this identity is possible only because of the DNA, right? We have already discussed then, while the formation of a DNA, there are certain chemical changes which takes place in the formation of DNA, and these chemical changes, though they are very much small little changes, we call them variations, right? And these variations slowly, generation to generation, they accumulate, and then you will find a different type of organism, or an organism with different looks, right? So we have seen that even in human beings, we have different type of feature. Every human being which is like present in the different parts of the world, they have a different look. If you see the people from Africans and Europeans, then South Asians, the north part of the South Asia, right? People, though we all are human beings, we all are Homo sapiens, but the features are very different. So this is due to the variations, right, children? Okay, so in a sexual reproduction, DNA is involved, right? And we can see the variations. But if the variation is drastic, then definitely that organism won't survive or that cell won't survive. So there are drawbacks also in sexual reproduction, right? But these variations are very important for the survival of species. If there is a change in the climate, it is very important for the survival of the species. So sexual reproduction results in the origin of new species. As I told you, these variations get accumulate and then a new species is formed, right? The sexual reproduction involves, yes, it involves the division in the sex organs, right? That that reduces the DNA matter to half, so that the zygote formed after the fusion have the same amount of DNA as the parent. It maintains DNA in species. This we are going to look in the next slide. I will tell you, explain you in a better manner with the help of an example and diagram. Over here, as you see, we have already talked that we need to retain the number of DNA in the organism. So what happened? This is an example of meiosis, right? So in meiosis, you have already done that four gametes are formed which are haploid in nature. Now what do you mean by haploid? That means half the number of chromosomes are present in the gamete. See, the parent has 46 chromosome, and this 46 chromosome further divide, okay, and give rise to four gametes. So four gametes are formed because this is a male. So here the gamete, the male gamete, is known as sperm. They have 23 number of chromosomes. Here the mother, right, she also gave rise to four gametes having 23 number of chromosomes, right? And when these two gametes, the sperm and the ovum, fuses together, they form a zygote which is retaining the same number of chromosome as their parents, right? Because we have seen that in multicellular organisms, right, there is a zygote formation, and after the zygote get formed, it divides and redivides, right? Because it divides and redivides, the cells needs lot of energy. So the energy, the source of energy is present in one of the gamete, and that gamete is nothing but the ovum, right? See, ovum has a lot of source of energy, food for the developing zygote, right? So because the new cells are continuously forming with the help with the division, cellular division, right? And definitely, so there are changes in the different sexual organs in the two different sex, that is male and female, because there are they have a different type of gametes. If you see the male gamete, it is quite motile. So you will find that even in plants, male gametes are motile and female gametes are not that motile, but female gamete has stored food for the new uh, for the new fetus to develop, right? So we can see the different types of gametes, and because of that there are different organs which are different in male and female, as well as in human beings and in many animals. The body structure is also different. Male body structure and female body structure are different, right? So this is the main cause, because they have gametes which have different structure, which have different purpose. Now coming to the sexual reproduction in plants, we all know that the plants which bear flower, okay, that undergoes a sexual reproduction, and these type of plants are called angiosperm, right? Now the flower consists of sepals, petals, stamens, pistil, right? And a flower is said to be unisexual and bisexual flower, right? A flower usually, if you see the hibiscus over here, we call it a bisexual flower. Why we call a bisexual flower? because it has a pistil, that is the female organs, female genetical organs, and the male, that is stamen, are present in the same flower. Because of this, they are called bisexual. So if both male and female reproductive parts are present in the same flower, we call it bisexual flower. An example of China rose and mustard. Okay, what do you mean by unisexual flower? Here you can see this is the male flower. Okay, that means this flower possesses only the male reproductive parts, and this is the female flower which possesses only the female reproductive parts, right? And the example are papaya and watermelon. Okay, so let's see the different parts of the flower, right? A typical flower consists of four main whorls. Usually we call this flower as a complete flower. A complete flower is a flower which has four main whorls. Now just look at the four main whorls, right? Number one is sepal. Here in the diagram you can see the sepal is a green leafy like structure. Okay, you will find around the petals, right? This green leafy like structure is a sepal. You can see this whorl, 1 2 3 4. Whorl means a one whole round, right? So this is called sepal, and inside the sepal you can see the petal, right? The colorful petals, these are colorful petals to attract insects for pollination, right? So this is the second whorl, and the third whorl is a stamen. Stamen is a male reproductive organs. You can see the whorl of stamen, and the whorl of stamen is known as androecium, right? And the innermost whorl is known as gynoecium, right? It is a carpel. Carpel is the female reproductive parts, right? It is also called pistil sometime, right? So carpel, pistil, and the whorl of this is known as gynoecium, right, students? So different reproductive parts of the flower we are going to study. Clear? Here just it is a flow chart. You can draw this flow chart in your copy. Stamen, it is a male part, and stamen consists of filament and anther. So filament and anther together known as stamen. Now the cell division which they undergoes is meiosis, because we want to reduce the number of chromosome, right, to half. That is n, that is haploid number of chromosomes. Carpel is a female reproductive part which is made up of style, ovary, stigma, right? And ovary is having egg cell, okay, female egg cell, we call it ovule, which also has haploid number of chromosome, that is half the number of chromosomes. Here are different parts of flowers, right? You can see anther and filament. Anther and filament together form stamen, right? And the stigma, the upper part, stigma, the style, a tube-like structure, and this is the ovary. The outer part is the ovary. Stigma, style, ovary together known as pistil. As I told you, they are called as pistil as well as carpel. So don't get confused. Okay. Inside the ovary, you can see the ovules, right? Inside the ovary, these are ovules. After fertilization, these ovules are going to form seeds, right? And there are sepal, as we have already discussed. This flower is supported by a stalk, right? Stalk is also known as pedicel. This is the stalk of the flower, right? Over the pedicel, this is a receptacle. Okay, this is also known as thalamus, right? Okay, and then we have learnt about petals, and I think we have done everything in this flower, right? So what is a petal? Petal is the whorl, and the whorl of petal is known as corolla. So the petal is very colorful in some plants, which is basically for the attraction of insects, to attract insects, right? And why to attract insects? That is for pollination, that we are going to discuss, okay, later. Now coming to the male parts of the flower, as I've already discussed, let us deal in detail, right? The stamen, these are the male parts of flower. Some stamens are collectively known as androecium. We have done. They are structurally divided into two parts, right? Okay, so they are divided into two parts. I'll just show you how they are divided into two parts. They are divided into two parts. This is anther over here and filament. Okay, so this whole stamen, anther and filament, together known as stamen. The anther, now here you can see there are pollen grains over here. Okay, there are pollen, these are the pollen sacs. Okay, these are the pollen sac, 4 pollen sacs. Inside the pollen sac you can see the dot structure, that is nothing but pollen grains. Now pollen grains are usually yellow in color, as you can see, right? And these thrones like structure, it helps pollen grain to stick to stigma, right? Now the filament, this is the long part, it is a long as cylinder attached to the anther. This is what is filament. Anther, I have already discussed, it is the head of the stamen. It looks like two lobes. Okay, it looks like this, anther, right? This is what is anther. Okay, it is responsible for producing the pollen, which is transferred to the pistil or the female part of the same or another flower to bring about fertilization. So what is fertilization? Is nothing but the fusion of male and female gametes. Okay, the female parts, okay, pistil, this forms the female part of the flower. Okay, collection of pistil is called gynoecium. Here you can see the pistil is a collection of a stigma, style, ovary and ovule. Stigma is this part of the style is a cylindrical, right? At the time of the germination of pollen grain, this style becomes hollow, right? And ovary, as you can see, the outer part is ovary. Inside the ovary you can see ovules, okay, and the future of ovules is nothing but seeds, right? So we have already discussed this. Here children, in order to make a new seeds, male gametes present in the pollen grain unite with the female gamete present in the ovule. To uh, to to happen this, there are two steps, the two process that takes place, which is pollination and fertilization. So pollination and fertilization are the two major steps which help in the fusion of male and female gametes, right? So what is pollination? Pollination is nothing but the transfer of pollen grain from the anther to the stigma of a carpel is called pollination, or you can say from the anther, from the stamen to stigma. The transfer of pollen grain from the stamen to stigma is known as pollination, in a very simple words, right? Now this is important because it is due to the pollination that male gametes are able to combine with the female gametes. So pollination is a very important process, right? So by this process, male gamete and female gamete, they can unite. Okay, they can come together, they can unite, right? So it's a very important process. So pollination is done by insects like bees, butterflies. It can be done by wind, by water, even by huge animals like elephants. Okay, so there are different ways of pollination, even by water. Okay, it's written here. And there are two types of pollination. One is self-pollination and other one is cross-pollination, right children? So you should be very careful when you are writing self-pollination and cross-pollination. So in self-pollination there are 2 points to be remembered. First, you can see in this diagram, okay, in case of bisexual flower, we have done the bisexual flower where the male and female parts are present in a same flower, right? So in that case, in case of bisexual flower, right, the stamen, the pollen grain from the stamen of the same flower, okay, it goes to the stigma of the same flower, right. So in case of bisexual flower, you can see the self pollination, right. The other way of self pollination is the pollen grain from the stamen, pollen grain from the stamen of the flower which is present on a plant, okay, it goes to the stigma of the other flower which is also present on the same plant, okay. So the two flowers, they are present on a same plant. You can see the two flowers here, the two flowers, they are present in the same flower. So just the pollen grains are getting transferred from the stamen of the flower to the stigma of another flower which is present on the same plant. So this is self-pollination. But what is cross-pollination? In cross-pollination, as you can see, this is a cross-pollination. Here the pollen grains which are present on the flower, okay, it transfers to the stigma of the other flower which is present in another plant. So the two different plants are two different plants, they are the part of cross pollination. So in cross pollination there are two different plants, okay, and the flowers, of course the flowers has to be of same species, right. If insect transfer pollen grain of, let's take of rose, and it sits on the sunflower, right, this transfer of pollen grains is not going to help at all. So whatever pollen grain which are which falls on sunflower, that they get degenerate, okay. It should be the flowers which are taking part in this process, they have to be of the same species, right children. And when pollen grain from the flower of one plant are carried to the stigma of a flower of another similar plant, it is called cross pollination, as we have done, right. So let's take the another point, that is fertilization. Okay, now what is fertilization? Once the transfer of the pollen grain has taken place from stamen of one flower to the stigma of another flower, or the stamen of one flower to the stigma of the same flower, right, whatever may be the condition, right. Once the transfer takes place, next process is fertilization. Now what is fertilization? It is the fusion of male and female gametes, okay. Now what happened in this? After the pollination, let's take the pollen grains have settled over here in the stigma of plants are, they are literally sticky, so that the pollen grain can stick over there, right. Over here the pollen grains got settled down, and you can see the pollen tubes are forming from these pollen grains, right. So there will be only one pollen grain which is going to form a pollen tube, complete pollen tube, which will get inside the ovary, right. So this, the nucleus or the sperm nucleus of this pollen grain is going to fuse with the egg cells which are present in the female part of a plant, that is ovary. And inside the ovary, in fact, they are present in ovules, right. So here is what the journey of a male nucleus to the female egg cell, right. So fertilization, it occurs inside the ovary. Zygote is produced in this process. We will see the journey: ovary, ovule. Inside the ovary, ovules are present. Inside the ovule, this is the ovary, right. Okay, inside the ovary, ovules are present, and inside the ovules you can see there are three cells, right. Okay, and the middle one is called the egg cell, which is going to fertilize by the male nuclei, right? And there are other three cells present at the other end of ovules. We are going to study in detail, right? There is a polar nuclei here in the middle. There is a polar nuclei, and at the top there are three more cells. Altogether there are 7 nuclei present inside the ovule. 3 over here, 3 at the top and 1 in the middle. So 3 plus 3 6 plus 1 7. Here children, this is double fertilization. Double fertilization takes place in the cell, in the plant's angiosperm, right? That is flower bearing plants. Now what happens in fertilization? We know that the fertilization is the union or the fusion of the nuclei of male and female gametes, right? In flower plants, pollen grain is a male gamete and ovule inside the ovary is female gamete, right? Now coming to the male gamete, in the male gamete there are two nucleus, right? One is the tube nucleus and the other one is generative nucleus. I'll show you with the help of a drawing. So if this is a pollen grain, right? Here in the pollen grain we have two nucleus. This is a tube nucleus, the other one is a generative nucleus, right? This tube nucleus, as the word suggests, tube nucleus, and this is generative nucleus. For nucleus I am just writing N nucleus, right? This tube nucleus, in fact, it helps to form the tube. Over here you can see it helps to form the tube through the style, okay, and then it goes to the ovary, and from ovary it goes inside the ovule. So this is my ovule, right? This is in fact the outer, this is embryo sac, right? And this is ovule. Inside the embryo sac, this is ovule. Inside the ovule you can see these three cells they are known as antipodal cells. Over here you can see antipodal cells, and the two are known as, these two are known as polar nuclei, and this is known as egg cell, right? Besides the egg cell, the two cells which are on the right and left, they are known as synergids or synergids, right? Now coming to the male nuclei, right? This tube nuclei, while coming down through style, okay, while coming down through style, this tube nuclei is making way, and behind the two tube nuclei, generative nuclei is coming. Now generative, why I am telling nuclei, because further this generative nuclei divides into two nuclei, right? This generative nucleus divides into two nuclei. This is generative nuclei, right? Okay, now tube nuclei has only one job, right? It has to make way for a generative nuclei so that it can go inside the ovule, right? So this is opening which is known as micropyle, fine. Once these two generative nuclei get inside the ovule, this tube nucleus will get degenerate. It get dissolved, degenerate. Okay, tube nucleus will get degenerate. Then what happened to the two generative nuclei? One of the generative nuclei will go first and fuse with the polar nuclei, right? Over here you can see, in this picture you can see that one of the generative nuclei, it went and it fuses with the two polar nuclei. As you can see, there is a fusion of three nucleus here. There is a fusion of three nuclei, and that is why we call it triple fusion, right? This is triple fusion. Right. Now here the second one, the second nuclei, the second generative nucleus will go and fuse with the egg nucleus or egg cell, right? This is egg cell. The second generative nucleus will go and fuse with egg cell, and this is going to form, this fusion is going to form zygote, as it's written here, right? And this zygote is having a diploid number of chromosome. Diploid means double the number of chromosome. N is haploid, 2n is diploid, right? So it has diploid number of chromosomes, and a zygote is formed because of the fusion of the generative nuclei and the egg cell. Now what is formed over here? This is called endosperm, right? This endosperm, it is 3n. Why it is 3n? Because there are 3 nuclei present in this, right? So this is going to form endosperm. Now what is endosperm in a very common language? It is food for developing fetus, right? Or developing embryo, not less fetus. For developing embryo, this is food for developing embryo. It provides nourishment to the developing embryo, right? Because there are two fusions taking place, two fertilization taking place, okay? So that is why we call it a double fertilization, children. So one sperm nucleus fuses with the egg cell nucleus, and the other sperm nucleus fuses with the two polar nucleus together, okay? And that is why we call it double fertilization. So this is what is the double fertilization, which takes place in angiosperm. Now what is after the fertilization? Now after the fertilization in the ovule, what happened? The fertilized egg divides in several times. The fertilized egg divides several times to form embryo. Now once the embryo is formed, a tough coat is developed around the ovule, and it gradually develops into seeds, right? The ovary of the flower, okay, it becomes very bulky, right? It swells up and then it forms a fruit. So automatically the seed is covered by a fruit. The seeds are inside the fruit, okay? So other parts of the flower, such as sepals, stamens, stigma, style, they dry and they fall off. Now fruit takes place of the flower. So what is the future of ovary? Future of ovary is fruit, and what is the future of ovules? Future of ovules is seeds, right? And these seeds are protected by a fruit, okay, which is a juicy part, right? These seeds contain a future plant or embryo which develops into seedling under suitable condition, right? So let's see what happened to the seeds and different parts of the seeds, right? Okay, in the process of development of seedling from the embryo under the appropriate condition, what are the appropriate condition? Appropriate condition are the sunlight, warm temperature, and humidity or moisture, right? If a seed get water, sunlight, and proper temperature where it can grow, right? This process of developing of seed into seedling, okay, is known as germination. Now let's see the different parts of seeds. Seeds and its part, the advantage of seed, we know that it protects the future plant. Okay, inside the seed, here is my future plant. Okay, here also in this seed, you can see it very carefully. It is a future plant which is protected inside the seeds, and these two are known as seed leaves, and in scientific language we call it cotyledon. Now this cotyledon, it provides food to the seedlings because we know that there is no green leaves still developed, right? So till the time the green leaves get developed, okay, they are formed in the plant, cotyledons serves as a source of nutrient to the small baby plant which we call seedling, right? So seeds have two parts. We can see the seeds have two parts. One is the cotyledon, the other one is embryo, right? What is the role of cotyledon? Stores food for the future plant, right? Now if you look at the embryo carefully, the upper part of the embryo, which will become a shoot of a plant, is known as plumule, and the lower part of the embryo, which will further in future becomes the root of a plant, is known as radicle. I will give you a simple trick to learn R for root and R for radicle. So this is a very simple trick. How will you learn which radical, what is the future of radical and what is the future of plumule? So you don't have to learn the future of plumule. You just have to remember R for radical, R for root. So if this small trick will help you to memorize, okay? So this is all about the plant, children. We have completed the sexual reproduction in plant. In the next session, I'm going to take sexual reproduction in human beings as well as few questions based on the sexual reproduction in plants. Practice today's topic, children. There are a lot of diagrams to practice, and thank you so much.